really vital. Why don't you walk the wheel with us? What is the matter, my American friend? What has upset you? The bad machine doesn't matter if he's a bad machine. I still don't believe it. You still don't believe you're a bad machine. To know yourself is to know God, my friend. The factory knows, that's why they put you here. You'll see. You'll find out. In time, you'll know.
Oh, I know. I already know. I know that you are a bad machine. That's why the factory keeps you here. Do you know how I know, huh? I know because I'm from the factory. I make the machines.
You're listening to Jim Dynamo's Bad Machine, home of the intellectual smackdown, where thought exists without error and truth knows no compromise. No quarter is asked, and no quarter is given, as the lies that bind us to the bad machine are torn asunder with unassailable fact and unquestionable reason. So put on your thinking caps and strap yourselves in, and stand by for the original man machine, Jim Dynamo.
When your bags ain't packed.
The workers, the strivers, the builders. These are our people. The builders of our world, struggling, fighting, bleeding, dying on the streets of our cities and on the front battlefields, fighting against the mutilation of our hopes and dreams. Who are they? They are the dark army. The dark murdering armies of Eurasia. In the barren deserts of Africa and India, on the oceans of Australia, courage, strength and youth are sacrificed. Sacrifice to barbarians whose only honor is atrocity. But even as we grasp the victory, there is a clash, an evil too, growing, spreading in our midst. Shout! Shout! Shout out his name!
And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. And yet the past, though its nature alterable, never had been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it in Newspeak. Doublethink.
The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam.
We're going to be going to Orlando this week. Are you going to be announcing any new parts in the investigation?
Yes, I'll be going to Orlando on Tuesday to continue my briefings in the case. Actually, though, what we're announcing tomorrow is that the FBI is releasing a partial transcript of the killer's calls with law enforcement from inside the club. These are the calls with the Orlando PD negotiating team who were trying to ascertain who he was, where he was, why he was doing this, all the while the rescue operations were continuing. That'll be coming out tomorrow, and I'll be headed to Orlando on Tuesday.
Including the hostage negotiation part of this?
Yes, it will be primarily a partial transcript of his calls with the hostage negotiators.
You say partial. What's being left out?
The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam.
Well, what we're not going to do is further proclaim this individual's pledges of allegiance to terrorist groups
The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam.
and further his propaganda.
So we're not going to hear him talk about those things.
We will hear him talk about some of those things, but we're not going to hear him make his assertions of allegiance. And
The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam.
this will not be audio. This will be a printed transcript, but it will begin to capture the back and forth between him and the negotiators. We're trying to get as much information about this investigation out as possible.
The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam.
The messages he had received referred to articles or news items which, for one reason or another, it was thought necessary to alter, or, as the official phrase had, to rectify. For example, it appeared from the Times of the 17th of March that Big Brother, in his speech of the previous day, had predicted that the South Indian Front would remain quiet, but that of the Eurasian Offensive would shortly be launched in North Africa. As it happened, the Eurasian Higher Command had launched its offensive in South India and left North Africa alone. It was therefore necessary to rewrite a paragraph of Big Brother's speech in such a way as to make him predict the thing that had actually happened. The Department of Justice is scrubbing references of radical Islamic beliefs from the transcript of calls Orlando terrorist Omar Mateen made to police during his massacre, Attorney General Loretta Lynch said on Sunday. A partial transcript of the conversations between the authorities and the Islamic terrorist Mateen, who killed 49 and wounded 53 in the June 12 terrorist attack on America, is being doled out to the American public. Now, if you understood the message that George Orwell tried to convey to you with his 1984 novel, written in 1948, you realize that what he was saying was that by controlling perceptions of current events and of past events, you can control the perception and the response to future events. You just listened to the affirmatively advanced fraud, Loretta Lynch, tell you how she's going to treat you like a slave in George Orwell's 1984 novel. To her, you're just a fool. The reason why you're just a fool is because you're allowing her and the media and her employer to manipulate the truth. And by manipulating the truth, what they're going to do is they're going to manipulate reality. What is reality? The reality is, on June 12th, the United States of America and its citizens were once again attacked by an Islamo-terrorist, the 103rd Islamo-terrorist attack, the 103rd Islamo-terrorist to be killed, committing an act of terrorism in the United States in the last 3 years. In the last 1,000 days, there have been over 103, it's actually 104 because 2 days after Omar Mateen unleashed his little rampage, another Somali Muslim decided he was going to commit his act of terror in Texas. Unfortunately, he was not blown apart, but he represented the 104th Islamo-terrorist to attack your nation. What Loretta Lynch decided was the best course of action was not to address terrorism, was not to fight the terrorism, was not to name the terrorist. Her best idea was to lie to you and tell you it wasn't terrorism. First they told you that it was an anti-gay attack, that it was a gay bashing, where 50 people ended up dead and another 50 people ended up in the hospital. Horse crap. The violence that the homosexual community in America experiences is mostly levied upon them by other homosexuals. And that's another one of those sad truths that the media doesn't want you to know. So it tells you fake stories. Sort of like Matthew Shepard. Remember Matt Shepard? The poor homosexual junkie who was crucified and left like a scarecrow in a field somewhere in the Midwest. For almost 2 years they pounded the American people with this anti-tradition, anti-heterosexual propaganda, making everyone think that Matthew Shepard was killed by people who hated homosexuals, when in truth, Matthew Shepard was killed by his ex-boyfriend. Yes, homosexual lover is the person responsible for killing Matthew Shepard, despite the 3 years of propaganda that you were treated to. Now, this was long before the current regime took over the White House and took over your mind and took over your ability to think critically. Your ability to think critically has been slowly eroded over the last 40 years. This is very simply illustrated. There was an Olympic star who 40 years ago won the decathlon. Can you tell me that Olympic star's name? That Olympic star was on the box of Wheaties. That Olympic star did many promotions for many years. And that Olympic star even married into a famous celebrity family. Now, if you've referred to that Olympic star as Bruce Jenner, you're 100% correct. That's who he is. If you referred to that Olympic star as Caitlyn Jenner, or as a female, well, what it shows me is that not only is that Olympic star mentally unstable, but you too are mentally unstable. And the reason you're mentally unstable is because you have decided that you will ignore reality and instead cleave to a mental illness. This person believes that now he's a female. So you believe it. What if that person believed he were Jesus Christ? Well, you would think that person was a little cuckoo, wouldn't you? If that person thought he were Napoleon, would you address him in French? Would you buy him a cannon and direct him to Russia? Would you introduce him to your sister Marie? No, you wouldn't do any of these things. You would acknowledge that this individual is mentally insane. But because an individual tells you that he thinks that he's a woman or she thinks that he's a man, you find that acceptable. The reason you find that acceptable is because mental illness is contagious. Mental illness can be pushed into a person and a population with unending and unyielding hammering and conditioning techniques. One of those techniques is 50% of you said Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner? He's a she now. No, he isn't a she. He's a he. He's a he who surgically wants to mutilate himself while he is poisoning his body with synthetic hormones that do not belong there. Now, if Bruce Jenner decided he were a dog, if he wanted to have a dog tail grafted to his ass, you would think this was insane. Because he wants to be castrated and have what's left of his genitalia manipulated into female-looking parts. You find this acceptable? You think this is a natural aspect of his mind? Let me tell you, it is not. Transsexualism never existed before the 20th century. Transsexualism was created by a lunatic homosexual named Magnus Hirschfeld, a Nazi scientist who experimented in the 1930s and 1940s on mental cases, cutting off penises, manipulating vaginas and labia, surgically mutilating people who needed psychological help. And what this individual did was, he was responsible for the first sex or gender reassignment surgery. Magnus Hirschfeld's mental illness and Nazi-like sadistic psychoses, where with a scalpel in his hand, he thinks that he is going to alter nature. That psychoses has metastasized over the last 80 years to where you, a normal person, finger brackets, will sit there and think that this Olympic star is now a female. No. It is simple things like this. It is simple things like going back and changing or tweaking a news story, or changing a picture, or forcing a syntax change in a sentence, or making you change the pronoun from something that you know is one thing to something that someone wants it to be, despite the fact that reality is telling you what it is. When you choose to embrace that non-reality opposed to the actual reality that you have known all your life, what it is you are accepting mental illness into your life. And what that does is that starts a little process in your brain. And that process also metastasizes where you begin to blur lines, and very strict black lines and very strict white lines become fuzzy gray lines. And in the fuzzy gray is where we have problems. The fuzzy gray is where you allow yourself to be conditioned to believe the unbelievable. And then what happens is unscrupulous individuals, like the affirmatively advanced Loretta Lynch, we will always refer to her as being affirmatively advanced because that is the fact. This woman, like a Sonia Sotomayor, like a Barack Obama, like a Michelle Obama, or like any countless individuals who are foisted upon us, are incapable of holding the positions that they currently hold. These people have positions where they belong because other forms of mental illness have opened the door and allowed this to take over society. For example, the very same individuals who would force a moron like Loretta Lynch, who admits that she's going to censor the news like Big Brother, like an Orwellian character, the people who gave us this person are morons themselves. Morons like Hillary Clinton. Morons like Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. Why would I call these individuals morons? Well, these particular morons are lawyers by profession. They are politicians as a form of their own mental illness, but their profession is they are lawyers. And between the two of them, Hillary Clinton and Andrew Cuomo, I believe they both failed the bar exam a total of 8 times. It might be 7 times. One of them may have failed it 3 times. One of them may have failed it 4 times. Yet, these people who could not pass the only test that they studied for, it's their job, right? This was their field of endeavor, and yet they failed, and they were allowed to go back 2 and 3 and 4 times, yet they managed to achieve positions of power? Will they lead you? Will they lead me? They presume to? Well, you see, you have to know what you're talking about in your own world before you want to talk about things in my world. And a person who can't pass the bar, the first shot out, I tell you what, that individual has no business talking to me about anything. That's all. Let's put them in the same position as you would a doctor who failed his medical exams. Would you go to a doctor who failed his boards? 2, 3, 4 times? He got it right the 5th time. So maybe he'll get your diagnosis right the 5th time. Sound good? How about your college professor? You know, the one who's going to certify you as university achieved. Say that individual failed their personal field of endeavor 4 and 5 times. Yet they're going to lecture you, who may have achieved perfect grades up to that point, and yet a half-wit, an individual who is affirmatively advanced for one reason or another, is going to tell you you're doing something wrong. Well, America, I think we've had about enough of that. Generation X, I know you've had enough of it. The boomers, I'm sorry guys, but you had the ball and you dropped it. You got all the good jobs, you took all the right positions, and instead of fighting the right fight, you decided to embrace the mental illness. So those of you who are referring to a fictional entity named Caitlyn Jenner, I tell you what, you, Caitlyn, and your favorite unicorn, toodaloo. You're psychotic. You're dangerous. For those of you who knew that I was talking about Bruce Jenner, well, I'm glad you're on the side of the light, because we're going to need you. And what we need you to do now is, you need to confront, on a legal level, massive class actions, personal civil suits, whatever need be done, because you're the people who studied for this. Remember, this is your job. My job is to lift heavy things and keep people safe. None of my clients are dead. If you've lost your cases, that means you didn't do your jobs right. Okay? So let's get things on a par. Some of us do our jobs, and there is no room for failure, unlike some of you. Now, those of you who have failed, this is your time to make up for that failure. Loretta Lynch and Barack Obama are in violation of the Constitution of this country. They're in violation of their oaths. every individual, every elected leader in the Congress or in the Senate or in a state office who is attacking the Second Amendment, these people need to be removed, as each and every one of them is in violation of their oath. And you people in the legal profession, it's your job now to represent us as the people. You know, we the people, you're part of the people. And if you're going to allow the people to be victimized while you have the power to change things, you're as bad as the people who are doing the victimization. You're no different than Loretta Lynch and Barack brother down in the White House, who have decided that there will be no slander of the rapist prophet of Islam. Can you imagine? We won't discuss the truth, because if we don't discuss the truth, and if we change the past, well, then the future is different. And then the next terrorist attack, well, that wasn't a terrorist attack. That was another anti-gay attack. And the next terrorist attack at a music concert, well, that wasn't a terrorist attack. That was someone who didn't like rock and roll music. And the next terrorist attack, well, that wasn't someone who was attacking America. That was someone who didn't like Beatlemania or Broadway plays. If we allow them, fools like Loretta Lynch and her boss, Barack Obama, to control what we think, you've already allowed Barack Obama and the media to control what you think, because you ignored the 20 years of his past where he himself identified as a Kenyan citizen, not an American. He was very proud in Harvard to have his papers say he was from Kenya. He was very proud to have in the foreword of his books that he did not write that he was from Kenya. Then in 2008, he decided he wasn't from Kenya, and the media told you he wasn't from Kenya, and you believed it. So he either lied to you before that, or he lied to you after it, and either way, you bought one of those lies. Rather than dismiss this individual, rather than realize that you're living in an Orwellian world, where people are going to tell you what to think and how to think, and if you know the truth, they're going to insist that you're wrong. Is this the type of world you want to live in? Is this the type of world you want your children to live in and your grandchildren to live in? How long do you think the dynamo is going to be powered up? Another 100 years? I can't keep fighting the fight. I need you to fight that fight. I need you to spread that fight to them so they fight the fight. And one bad machine becomes a nation of bad machines. And those bad machines overthrow the worst machine of all, the machine of tyrants. That machine of tyrants never seems to cease its own motion. It always seems to have an unending source of willing drones who will throw itself down into the machine and for the machine and against any who stand against that machine. What Loretta Lynch and this government did as a response to the June 12 Muslim terrorist attacks on this nation is, within strict definition, Orwellian. If you do not recognize now that you are living in 1984, if you do not recognize now, maybe you should go back and rent one of those movies. Rent Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's a silly film, but it gets the point across the same way. There's a 1960s version of 1984. There's a 1980s version of 1984. There's a 2016 version of 1984. Why don't you rent the older two versions and juxtapose it against how you're living now? And dare you tell me that Big Brother isn't watching you. You're listening to Jim Dynamo, the man with the nickel. Are you ready to get blitzed? Prepare yourself for life's uphill battle. Master Trainer Jim D's Fitness Blitz training techniques will make you stronger, more determined, and ready for any challenge. Burn fat, build muscle, improve your cardiovascular health with resistance training, mental conditioning, martial arts, yoga, and sports-specific performance enhancement. Train in your home, on Fitness Blitz certified equipment, or in your local gym. Take the Fitness Blitz Challenge. Begin every day by pushing your limits and taking control of your life. Grab life by the horns and reach for your ideal potential. Dive into a new concept in total health and competitive activity. Challenge yourself to be better and dare not to fail with Fitness Blitz. Learn more at www.fitnessblitztv or by calling 917-804-6589. Begin your quest to be your best with Fitness Blitz today. This is the original man machine, Jim Dynamo. When I need a break from defending the Earth from alien invaders, I listen to The Online Movie Show with Phil Hall, Mondays at 7 p.m., only on pprnradio.net. Download the podcast now.
On the President's order, the bitter taste of war was returned to Japan. We fashioned a daring scheme to have the Hornet launch a force of bombers and strike at Tokyo from the sea. All the volunteers for this secret and hazardous job had been specially trained by Colonel Jimmy Doolittle. While under destroyer escort, the 80 Tokyo Raiders held a deck ceremony with Japanese medals. Doolittle fastened one of these to a 500-pound bomb. The medals were going to be returned with interest. Lashed to the flight deck, the 16 B-25s had a rough voyage. Hoping to reach a takeoff point 450 miles from Japan, but ready to start in event of discovery, the crews kept fit. They were discovered. After avoiding 2 enemy patrol vessels, the task force realized they were sighted by a Japanese picket boat. The Hornet's escort promptly sank. Since secrecy had been compromised and fearing an alarm all over Japan, Doolittle, forced into the decision, ordered the planes to be launched. This was 800 instead of 450 miles from Tokyo, and 10 hours earlier than planned. In spite of the last-second change, preparations went according to rehearsal. Only 467 feet of clear deck faced Doolittle's lead ship. The rest barely had room in which to rev up. The last plane hung precariously out over the stern of the Hornet. After the wind-up by the flight officer, Doolittle made his run down the plunging deck. With 100 feet to spare, he led the parade. The crewmen cheered as one plane after another screamed down the swaying runway. Launching fully loaded medium bombers had never been done before. When the decks of the flagship were cleared, Admiral Halsey signaled, "To Colonel Doolittle and his gallant command, good luck and God bless you."
Tokyo, oddly enough, had just completed an air raid drill. Their patrol boat had warned the city, but the attack was expected the next day. Therefore, the Jap war machine rolled on, unmindful of the approaching eagle. Target factories were turning out munitions tagged for Corregidor, Midway, and Dutch Harbor. Secure behind their Pacific fortress, and confident of an early victory, they discounted America's ability to fight back.
Thus, the bombers were virtually unopposed as they flew on the deck. At 12:15, the attack was opened by Doolittle, who dove in before he unloaded his incendiaries upon the Japanese captain. One after another,
As the raiders left Tokyo with a broad trail of flame and smoke in their wake, Japan tasted war. As Doolittle later promised, "We're going back to Tokyo, and we shall go in full array and with mighty allies."
The The Empire of Japan was haughty, secure across the Pacific Ocean, out of range of American bombers. Emboldened by their unchecked conquest of Asia and the Pacific, and their now successful sneak attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, the Empire would boldly gin up its war machine. Americans had for almost 4 years watched newsreel footage of the Axis powers' multi-continent land grab. The unanswered strike on Pearl Harbor was enraging and demoralizing. Roosevelt and his War Department crafted a bold plan to give Americans something to be proud, a strike on the distant empire's home territory. They could hit our ships in the Pacific, but we would hit them where they ate and slept, at home where they thought they were safe. The Doolittle raid on 18 April 1942 was a foreboding prelude of American air power and Japan's ultimate fate. Tokyo, Nagoya, and Yokohama, the primary strategic targets, and all successfully hit. One of the volunteers of that critical mission, Corporal David Thatcher, was the engineer and gunner on B-25 bomber Flight Crew No. 7. Corporal Thatcher was one of only 2 members of the Doolittle Raiders to survive to 2016. On Sunday, June 19, 2016, 74 years after he helped change the fate of billions of Asians and tens of thousands of Americans, the world said goodbye to David Thatcher. He died of complications from a stroke he suffered the same day. The world is a better place because of men like David Thatcher. The Bad Machine salutes Corporal David Thatcher, ever grateful to men like he and Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle's Raiders. You give us all a reason to proudly look up to the sky. You're listening to Jim Dynamo's Bad Machine. Myths of the Machine is brought to you by our sponsor, Mighty Man Limited. Be a master of the universe when you wear Mighty Man Limited athletic and sportswear, custom-designed athletic compression gear for male and female athletes, compression shirts, sports bras, yoga pants, hoodies, and more. Available only at mightyman.logosoftware.com. Be mighty. Since the time when men gathered around campfires and told tales of the warriors who challenged the monsters that gather in the dark. The mighty men who fought alongside the gods, some rising to victory, others falling to the abyss. These are the heroes who became the myths of the machine. General Mick Riley, Lieutenant Commander, Room 40, currently attached to Director of Military Intelligence, 11 September 1918. The Americans were going to make a show of it at San Miguel, and all the top brass was here to observe their folly. Pershing's First Army, as part of the American Expeditionary Forces, assured Marshal Foch they would break the Germans' fortification at the strategic point and stop von Gallwit's plan to take Verdun and then Paris. The railway was the key. Once the dreadnought guns reached San Miguel, the Krupp-designed cannons could level Verdun and in the City of Lights within month's end. The Krupp boys had put something new on the rail, a 400mm supergun they called the Mighty Max. Jerry just loved his bully boy nomenclatures, the Mighty Max indeed. Old Blackjack would have his First Army pinch off and isolate San Miguel, seizing the city, then head north to the fortress city of Metz, where the Germans planned France's downfall behind impenetrable fortifications, now made more secure by heavy weapons. The ministry must have thought this would have been a disaster for the Sammies. They didn't seem to realize or accept Europe had been at this war for 4 years already, and all the Americans would learn here is that this war was fought in short, bloody steps, not the miles of gains that Pershing guaranteed with his army. All the top brass were here, and in secret no less. Even Mansfield Smith Cumming was here, He left his cosy London office to slog across North France to witness the Americans learn the wages of entrenched warfare. At 2100 hours, the Americans were in position at the Pont de Mousson, with a plan to break through the fortification line, seize the garrison at Norroy, and continue northeast, following the Moselle River, Pershing's West Point madman Patton and his lumbering armored tanks, after they had taken Thiaucourt, both battalions meeting at the city of Enval before pushing north to the impenetrable Metz, where Foch had wanted to hold, protecting Verdun. Pershing insisted he would push 80 kilometers into entrenched occupied territory. The initial strike was scheduled for 0500. At 0400, we were directed to the forward command and observation station. The observation balloons were being filled with hydrogen gas that would hold them aloft while the gondola-bound passengers might provide detailed information about the activity on the front lines. C. of Special Branch and Sir Reginald Hall, also from Room 40, were present along with Pershing and his commanders, General Hunter Liggett and his Lieutenant Cox. We marched the zigzag trench the full mile before finally arriving at the forward trench. A week of rain had turned the zigzag into a small muddy pond filled with floating cigarette butts and chewing gum wrappers. The Sammy Doughboys were to a man, fresh-faced, clean-shaved, and as tall as young oak trees. Little did they realize German guns would reap that forest of all Americans before the day ended. At 0:45, a squad of American infantry riflemen appeared escorting a Major Chet Phillips, an older gentleman, an American Negro Sammy, and a young boy no more than 12 years of age. The Major made the appropriate introductions to his American superiors before the group was led to where I stood with Cumming, Hall, and Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch. Phillips saluted, then introduced his odd guests, the American archaeologist from the New York Museum of Natural History, Dr. Hans Hermann, and his 12-year-old son, Hugo Hermann, and their porter, a Harlem hellfighter named Johnson, a serpent-eyed son of Africa, removed from his French unit, now assigned the peaceful role as a luggage attendant. The Negro carried the young boy on one shoulder as to keep his feet from the ankle-deep mud, a large leather valise strapped across the other. The Negro gently placed the boy down on a wooden pallet where the least mud had been allowed to gather. This war was the damnedest thing, and a child in a forward trench just minute before forward bombardment and troop movement was absolutely insane. Come to think of it, where were all the American infantrymen? This forward trench was only 50 yards from the first apron of Concertina. There should be 300 men, with fixed bayonets ready to head over the top and into the German guns. And instead, the Allies' top commanders were gathered here in a muddy trench at the Pont de Mousson with a group of American tourists. What were the Americans playing at here? They expect Patton's tanks and Mitchell's biplane legion would honestly break the Hindenburg line and clear a path all the way to Metz? Preposterous! Mitchell's planes couldn't carry enough ordnance, and Patton's steel monstrosities were slower than a man could walk, and they were susceptible to the kerosene flame bombs the Huns had ingeniously thought up. This was madness. The first whistle sounded, and the observation balloons were unmoored and floated silently above the lines. The artillerymen readied their guns for a predicted million-round fusillade. This H-hour was already a joke. The American scientist, clearly no fighting man, in his tweed suit, the Negro, would not be allowed to fight alongside even his fellow All-Americans, even if any of them were prepared to charge across no man's land, which clearly this lot was not. The second whistle blew. In the distance, the faint echo of the German's whistle echoed a response, readying Fuchs's forces to repel the Americans and French advances. The professor directed the hellfighter to hand him the leather valise, which was placed on the nearest map table. Only 3 minutes before German shells would pound the zone between their listening posts and our own, only 40 yards away. This professor was mad to allow his son to be exposed to the impending savagery. "Ready yourself, son," he stated calmly to the lad.
"Okay, Pop."
The boy removed his overcoat, his sweater, and shirt. He undid the laces of his leather boots, and stepping out of them one at a time, he stripped off his heavy wool stockings, socks, as the Yanks called them, and stepped into the cold trench mud. The professor undid the leather fasteners that held the flaps of the large valise closed, then struggled with the damp brass zipper. Once open, the older, spectacled man produced a round metal shield like something found on a museum sculpture. We were 90 seconds away from an artillery bombardment, and these daft Americans were about to perform a bizarre ritual to some damned pagan Bronze Age pantheon. It was total madness in a world gone mad. I could see the looks on Cummings and Hall's faces that they were thinking the same. Marshal Foch was seemingly uninterested and spent his time discussing Le Mort Noir, the Black Death, with his officers. Apparently, the Negro porter was a decorated hero amongst the French. A French officer spoke above the whispered volume Foch had been using, and his words carried to the American Negro's ears. The so-called Black Death Johnson had supposedly killed 24 Germans barehanded, being shot and stabbed almost a dozen times, yet here he was, with what seemed only a mild limp. "A phantom," said one. "A ghost who still walks." Johnson ignored the commentary and spoke to the young boy. You okay, Mr. Hugo?
I'm all aces, Hank.
The boy replied.
I'm not even a little cold.
You just remember now, just like we practiced back at Camp Gordon, these here Huns, they fight good, see? But they fight like machines. Clockwork men, fighting a clockwork fight. You the wrench we gonna throw at the Huns' clockwork army. The boy smiled with a quick nod of his head. 1 minute to go before the last whistle. What on earth was I watching? The boy's father approached him, the metal shield extended forward in his arms. The shield looked to be silver or nickel. It was a coiled snake. At its center, a lion's face, his mane spiked with a solar ray crown. This museum piece only made the spectacle more queer for any sane observer. The boy took the shield, clearly too heavy for a small frame. Now, son, say the words carefully.
Okay, Pop.
The boy excitedly declared. The boy held the shield, sliding his thin arm into the oversized leather strap, then gripping the fixed metal handle crafted to the shield, and spoke, the older man silently mouthing his words in time with the boy.
Canubis. Navis vieneth. Gigantor icta. Baofita.
Nothing happened. No, alerted the old man. Say it slowly, properly. Concentrate. You can do it, son, just like you did at Camp Gordon, encouraged Chet Phillips. The black hellfighter just gave the boy a silent nod and a wink. The boy smiled at the heroic killer and took a deep breath.
Canubis. Navis vieneth. Gigantor icta. Baofita.
He smiled before an explosion of light and sound filled the trench. Blinded, deafened, I had time to think we were all dead men, the heads of Allied command, military naval intelligence, the American scientist, and his poor boy who would never grow to manhood or father sons of his own. The explosion of light was warm, but not as I might have expected a blast from German ordnance might be. As it sent me off to my death, I did not feel shrapnel tear into my body. The thunderous sound, like a lion's roar, now but a ringing in the ear, as one might experience being too close to a discharging Enfield. But nothing now. Stunned, surprised, the Allied command and intelligence officers were delighted to realize no German shell caught us unaware. But to our collective amazement, standing in the place where the young boy stood was a titan of myth, the silvery metal shield unchanged, but instead of the lad's skinny arm holding it, the straps and buckle now snug against the heavily muscled arm of a warrior, like one might have seen at the siege of Troy, or who crewed upon the legendary Argo. Armor that would have perfectly adorned the demigod Achilles, now protected the limbs and torso, a golden helm with a crimson horsehide crest on his head. The trench was silent. 30 seconds to whistle. Fox stood silent, as if punched in the gullet. Cumming and Hall adjusted their spectacles, while the old American scientist smiled at the warrior who stood in the place where his son was, his own eyeglasses brilliant with the light reflected from the Titan's armor. 10 seconds. Be careful, my son, the old man begged the Titan, who smiled confidently at him. Worry not, father. I have this task well at hand, the Titan replied. You go get him, boy, snarled the black fighter, handing him a long metal spear that he had unwrapped from its canvas bag. The Titan looked at the Negro. Protect father, old friend. I will return when the labor is complete and the foe is vanquished. Remember, Hugo, 1 hour, the old man desperately conveyed. The armored Titan nodded to the old man and turned his head in the direction of the trench rim. The boy's now adult face hardened from its charming confidence to that of a grim, tight-lipped veteran who had gone over the top more times than any man would care to remember. A single ladder was placed against the trench wall, where 100 others should have stood alongside, the American privates backing away from the Titan without taking their eyes from him, or even blinking. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Americans unleashed their artillery. Within seconds, the Germans did the same, and explosions tore across no man's land, sending rocks into our forward trench. While the others took cover, the Titan slowed his breathing, his fingers tightening on the metal spear shaft. On his left, I could see him tighten one finger, then the next, in his own silent countdown. Our eyes met for a brief second as his final finger tightened to the shield hand grip, his countdown complete. Looking upward, the armored Titan caught glimpse of one of Bill Mitchell's air-wing biplanes, and he leapt like a grasshopper and was gone from the trench. Everybody clambered to the armored observation post, and in an instant they could see the armored warrior land near our listening post, nearly 50 meters away. It was incredible. It was inhuman. I remember looking back where I stood just a minute ago to assure myself that I was not dead, my body not lying in the trench, as I watched this mythic hero stride across the French landscape. Nothing, only the undamaged trench and the boy's folded tweeds on the trunk table. I produced my field glasses and observed alongside with the Allied spectators, who similarly viewed the fantasy come to life unfold through Geiss crystal lenses. The Titan again leapt effortlessly over the barbed wire ribbons, and charged on foot across no man's land, faster than any thoroughbred or greyhound I had ever seen. A lion-headed serpent shield held in front of his body as he charged, as German 10mm bullets bounced away, leaving the shield wielder unharmed. He shouldered his spear, taking aim at the advanced German troops, and he hurled it at the Huns. This was no simple javelin, like we had seen at those Athens games just a few years ago. This was something of mythic lore. The metal missile literally screeched through the air, with a blood-curdling roar not dissimilar from the cacophony that had announced the arrival of the Titan warrior. The spear, as if directed, ripped through German after German, ending the war for each of them upon contact. It roared from dying crowd to dying crowd, returning to its master's hand, only to be hurled again at the advancing foe. In less than a minute, the Titan had felled 50 Huns with a spear. I could see Blackjack's smug grins spread wider under his bushy mustache, his amazing display now charging into a host of German fighters. Turning back to my field glasses, I saw the Titan, sword now in hand, slashing and hacking at Fuchs' best trench fighters, felling one after the other with a bloody blade and gore-soaked aegis. He was unstoppable. The German guns were useless. The press of their numbers also useless. They threw stick bombs at him, sacrificing their trench fighters to stop their Homeric swordsmen. Sweeping aside foe after foe, this modern-day Ajax, unwavering, labored at his Herculean task. The German treat whistles were greeted with American advance whistles, and suddenly 1,000 doughboy Sammies with new Chevaux auto rifles went over the top and marched through the ribbons and cut across no man's land without a single defensive German bullet to prevent them. Foxmen chatted away at the birth of 20th century mythology. What we witnessed here today had not been seen by human eyes for almost 2,000 years. While we were all transfixed on the one-man phalanx and the carnage she wreaked, the American scientist never watched what occurred after his transformed son leaped out of the trench. He sat quietly, with his back to the forward trench's sandbagged wall, his eyes fixed on a pocket watch. He occasionally removed his eyeglasses, rubbing his eyes and wiping condensation from the fogged lenses. He looked at the Negro hellfighter. 57 minutes, he said worriedly. Relax, sir. Your boy knows the drill. He'll be back in time. I pray to the gods you're right, mein Freund, the professor replied, his nervousness revealing his consciously hidden childhood accent. Living up to its promise, America welcomed newcomers to its shores that might try something new. This Professor Herman was most likely a boy when he shipped west. Old accents bring old hatreds, I recall my headmaster at the King's Academy taught me. Royal doors remain closed to Connaught men, his way of telling me to hide my own native Irish accent, whilst employed in Albion. Just you wait and see, the dark-skinned protector replied to his employer, his own concerned eyes never leaving the trench rim. He wasn't worried about a Hun raiding party or a stick bomb attack. His concern, as indicated by his restless, weaponless hands, was only for the boy. No experienced trench fighter, not even the indefatigable Black Death Johnson, stood in a forward trench without a weapon in his hand. Yet here stood America's indestructible man, wiping sweaty palms on his doughboy khakis, barely managing to conceal his own nervous concern as the boy's father did his disciplined American accent. The old man nervously rubbed the pocket watch crystal as the hour ticked away. The hellfighter watched as the last grains of sand poured through the concave of an hourglass. In the distance, the Americans' French-made rifles reported shot after shot. The nervous professor looked at his bodyguard with grim resignation. What could he be nervous about, I thought? His son was transformed into an unstoppable engine of destruction, who single-handedly broke through the German Fuchs' best infantrymen and fortifications with a spear, a sword, and a shield. Don't you fret now, Professor. Hugo is one smart boy. The apple don't fall far from the tree. You'll see. The Negro glanced at his own primitive time device. As sand fell in single grains, the steady concentrated pour now diminished by the past hour. As if on cue, a bloody howl charged across the heavens, getting closer and closer until the trench was slammed by a real impact. Surely a Hun mortar had hit us this time, as muddy debris was strewn everywhere, the impact knocking Fock and Cumming to the muddy trench floor. We all felt the shell impact this time. We had to abandon the trench before the slow fuse burned down, and our position was just another crater in no man's land. Hall and I helped See to his feet, while the Frenchies did the same with Fock. Pershing and Chet Phillips were standing over the kneeling American archaeologist. The hellfighter also had taken a knee. The doughboy riflemen gathered around the senior officers, their bayoneted shakoes held ready. "We must flee!" shouted Marshal Foch to the Americans, who stood looked at him silently. Laying in the freshly churned mud was the Titan, stunned by the force of his impact into the trench. There was no German shell hissing away with a burning fuse, The armored warrior had returned as dramatically as he departed, like a thunderbolt sent from Olympus striking the earth. One of Marshal Foch's aides shouted, "Mon Dieu, help him!" He attempted to rush to the fallen Titan's assistance. "No!" cried the American professor, his black companion also putting up a hand in protestation as to the Frenchman's honorable actions. All attention focused on the fallen warrior. Nobody had seen the final grain of sand bounce from one edge of the glass passageway to the other, finally making its slow descent to the pile of glass-enclosed white beach sand, now united in a single heap, the handful of silicate particles collected from where a young Helene named Cassandra was bound to pillars, destined for a grisly fate. It shifted and settled, reminding Kronos to open and close the energy gate, until again special words and a special shield would focus them anew. Before the French officer reached the Titan, the thunderous lion's roar ripped through the trench, the same flash of brilliant light as we had witnessed earlier. As the awesome display dissipated, we were shocked and yet not that the Titan had transformed again back to the 12-year-old boy. The Americans didn't have a special weapon to break the 4-year stalemate of this damned trench warfare. They had a gift from the heavens themselves. The older American helped his son from the muddy trench pallet, their boy Johnson doffing his own trench coat to cover the boy, while 3 of the doughboys seemingly wrestled with the metal spear, pulling it from the trench's rear wall. If I didn't know better, I'd swear it was growling and cursing for blood, in what sounded like my grandfather's old Gaelic tongue. The 4th Sammy replaced the spear's hood, and the growling and cursing seemed to stop. Lifting the boy to his thin, muscled shoulders, the hellfighter attempted to cover the boy's naked legs, the boy's father, ever grateful, holding the lad's hand. Smiling ear to ear, his mustachioed face beaming, Blackjack Pershing addressed the group. "Gentlemen, generals, His Majesty's representatives, when you asked us to stop the war, we promised you we would. Today was just the first demonstration of just how we'll do it. As President Wilson has assured you, this great war of 4 years will be over in 60 days, and thanks to our special weapon, it is a guarantee. While the technical details of this awesome fighter's origins must remain a secret at this time, you may return to your respective governments, assuring them that Uncle Sam is on the job." Putting one hand on the American professor's shoulders, Pershing reintroduced his fellows. "Gentlemen, generals, messieurs, H-Hour is a success. I present to you, codename Abraxas. The Hearst boys are calling him the All-American." Michael James Riley IV closed his great-grandfather Mick's journal, checking one more time the British Directorate of Military Intelligence gold leafing and the World War I-era Corps of Intelligence Police declassified stamps. They seemed authentic, as did similar stamps on the trunk of journals locked away these many years in his great-aunt Beth's Yonkers Palisade home. Aunt Beth had died, like so many of his older family members, during the week of Thanksgiving. For the last 20 years, a family member, close or distant, would shuffle off the mortal coil the week of Thanksgiving. Now at 35 years of age, with Aunt Beth's passing, he was alone in the old stone and wood mansion. The only family she had remaining, Beth stole to bequeath her brother-in-law Mick Riley's American home to his only surviving relative, his great-grandson, Michael James. The roof leaked, the pool was cracked, and the boiler and kitchen hadn't been replaced since the Reagan administration, when his great-grandfather had died, leaving the property to Beth. Michael Riley ran his fingers across the journal one more time. The All-American. It was a pulp character. Nobody even knew who he was these days, with ice princesses and tales of little mermaids. Nobody cared about armored war heroes in 2005. That was so 80s. Like all those old Jimbo films. It was all right-wing propaganda nonsense. Maybe, thought Michael, some collector would buy all of this junk. He'd check eBay and see if any of the Republican weirdos wanted to add this stuff to their collections of Bibles and AK-47s. He measured the heft of his great-grandfather's old CIP badge with the number 17 engraved into its face. Agent 17. Ha! He flipped the badge in the air, and fumble fingers, he dropped it, allowing the antique badge to skitter across the dusty attic floor. Damn it! Michael raced after the badge, not wanting to lose the valuable piece of junk. The badge came to rest in front of an old armoire blocked with attic debris. Unable to reach the badge, Michael was forced to move the heavy boxes of books and vintage World War I and World War II memorabilia. Pushing the last steamer trunk aside, Riley reached for the badge when the now unblocked armoire door swung open, striking him in the head as he knelt forward. Ah! Rubbing his head, Michael looked into the once blocked-off armoire. Inside it were a long, canvas-wrapped shaft and a tan leather valise, similar in size to an artist's portfolio, with knotted leather straps holding it tightly sealed. If it was what he thought it was, he would make a small fortune selling it to some cosplay kid in Germany. His aunt was always entertaining, but leave it to her to put toys in an old armoire like they were real. Sweet old gal. Still, it had to be 50 years or more since anybody made this type of collectible. Selling them would be well worth the Google time, and he could hopefully get a head start on the upcoming home repairs without digging into his pocket first. He reached for the long canvas-wrapped spear. When his hand touched it, it moved. It vibrated. He reached for it again. He grabbed it, and it shook itself violently. An audio unit embedded in it even made growling noises. Michael Riley reached a third time. Grabbing the shaft, it shook, growled, and even hissed as it pulled itself from his hands. What the hell? He reached instead for the brown leather valise. It did not resist him, or make any noise, or vibrate to his relief. It had to weigh 25 pounds. Placing the leather case on a nearby steamer trunk, he undid the thong laces and struggled with the ancient brass zipper. Flipping the valise lid, he revealed a large metal discus shield. It looked like a large metal snake, coiled, with a lion's head at its center. The 3D details were amazing. The hair of the lion seemed like the real thing, only dipped in liquid silver, then hardened. He lifted it to check the silversmith's pedigree stamp. 25 pounds of World War I silver would net a pretty penny. He found nothing. That was odd. He thought craftsmanship like this was something to make any capitalist proud. Michael Riley was puzzled why he couldn't even find a casting seam. How on earth was this thing made? Aside from the intricately detailed serpent with the lion's head, the only marking on it were 39 characters in a language which he was clueless. Wait, he thought. The words were in his great-grandfather's journal. What if... He trailed off. No, this was not a magic shield, and those were not magic words, even if he could read them. It was silly. A 35-year-old man thinking he'd found a magic shield that belonged to his great-grandfather's World War I sidekick. What a joke. He'd always heard that great-grandpa Mick Riley was quite the jokester. He even had me fooled. Michael retrieved his ever-present Something brand cell phone and snapped a photo of the old metal shield, then casually flipped the leather valise closed, concealing the old antique collectible. He reached for the attic light string and doused the bulb. He walked to the attic access door, looking back. He brought his cell phone to his mouth and spoke. "Sarah?" An electronic female voice responded. "This is Sarah. How may I help you?" Michael smiled and replied to the automated search engine. "Do internet search. World War I. Magic Shield. The All-American." "Thank you," the voice on the handheld device answered. "World War I. Magic Shield. The All-American. Searching." You've been listening to Jim Dynamo's Bad Machine on the PPRN Radio Network. Be part of the Bad Machine Radio Revolution by following our Twitter page at Bad Machine Radio and by visiting pprnradio.net. Bad Machine is a one-man media production, the exclusive owner of all original content. Otherwise, no rights are reserved. 2016.